The role of anxiety in social control. You send a message to your manager asking if you can take Friday off. You already have the time. You're allowed to use it, but you still feel nervous hitting send. You wait. 3 hours go by, no response. You check your phone, you refresh your email, you start wondering if the request was reasonable. You think about the timing. You remember she seemed busy this week. You start composing a follow-up message in your head, something that sounds less demanding. 6 hours later, she replies, "That should be fine." That's it. 4 words. No explanation for the delay. No acknowledgement that you waited. You feel relief, then a small flash of annoyance that you can't quite place. But mostly you just feel grateful it's approved. You didn't do anything wrong. She didn't say no. But something happened in those 6 hours. You felt something. And that feeling did something. The next time you need to ask for something, you'll hesitate a little longer. You'll word it more carefully. You'll add more justification. You'll apologize for asking. This is how anxiety works as a tool of control, not through threats, not through rules, through waiting, through silence, through the feeling that you might be asking for too much. What anxiety does in social systems. Anxiety is not just a personal emotion. It's a signal that moves through interactions and shapes behavior over time. When someone feels anxious in a relationship, at work, or in a group, they become more careful. They monitor their own actions more closely. They try to predict what others want. They adjust what they say and do to avoid consequences they can't always name. The person causing the anxiety doesn't need to make threats. They don't need to punish anyone. They just need to create uncertainty. They need to delay feedback. They need to withhold clarity. They need to make the other person unsure whether they're safe, valued, or acting correctly. Anxiety makes people manageable. It makes them predictable. It makes them focused on not making mistakes instead of asking whether the situation itself makes sense. This happens in families. It happens in workplaces. It happens in friendships and romantic relationships. It happens in institutions and online communities. Anywhere someone depends on another person's judgment, approval, or response, anxiety can become a method of influence. The person feeling anxious often doesn't realize what's happening. They think they're being considerate. They think they're managing their own expectations. They think they're reading the situation correctly. But the anxiety isn't coming from inside them. It's coming from the structure of the interaction. And that structure is often shaped by someone else. How anxiety gets built into relationships. Anxiety doesn't appear all at once. It builds through repeated interactions where one person has more control over outcomes than the other. A new employee starts a job. She sends her first report to her supervisor. He doesn't respond right away. 2 days later, he sends back a short message. Got it. No feedback. No indication of whether it was good or bad. She doesn't know if she did well. She doesn't know what to fix. She doesn't know if he's happy or annoyed. She just knows he saw it. The next report, she spends extra time. She double-checks everything. She makes it longer, more detailed. She wants to show she's serious. He responds the same way. Thanks. Now she's confused. Did the extra work matter? Is he too busy to give feedback? Is he deliberately withholding it? She doesn't know. Over time, she stops expecting clear feedback. She starts guessing what he wants. She watches his mood. She asks coworkers what they think. She develops a constant low-level worry that she's not doing enough or doing too much. This is not because she's insecure. It's because the communication pattern gives her no stable ground. Every action is a guess. Every message is a test. And she never gets enough information to stop testing. The supervisor may not be doing this on purpose. He might just be busy. He might think short replies are efficient. He might assume she knows she's doing fine. But the effect is the same. She becomes anxious. And that anxiety makes her more focused on him, more careful around him, more oriented toward avoiding his displeasure than toward doing her actual work. How anxiety changes communication. When someone is anxious, their communication changes in specific ways. They use more qualifiers. Instead of saying, "I think we should try this approach," they say, "I was wondering if maybe it might be worth considering this approach, but I'm not sure." They apologize more. "Sorry to bother you. Sorry for the long email. Sorry if this is a dumb question." They front-load justification. Before making a request, they explain why it's reasonable. They anticipate objections. They try to prove they've thought it through. They wait longer to respond. They don't want to seem too eager or too demanding. They match the other person's delay, or wait even longer. They ask permission for things they don't technically need permission for. "Is it okay if I take my lunch break now?" When lunch breaks are already scheduled. They monitor tone obsessively. They reread their messages multiple times before sending. They try to sound friendly but not too casual. Professional but not cold. Confident but not arrogant. All of this takes energy, and none of it is about the actual content of what they're trying to communicate. Meanwhile, the person on the other side of the interaction doesn't have to do any of this. They can be brief. They can delay. They can ignore tone. They can ask directly without justification. This imbalance isn't about personality. The anxious person isn't naturally more polite or more insecure. They're responding to a power difference that the interaction itself created. How silence and delay create anxiety. One of the most effective tools for generating anxiety is withholding response. A manager doesn't reply to a request for a week. A parent gives their adult child the silent treatment after a disagreement. A friend reads a message and doesn't respond for days. The person waiting doesn't know what the silence means. Are they angry? Are they thinking it over? Did they forget? Are they making a point? Without information, the mind fills in gaps. And because the person waiting is in the lower power position, the gaps usually get filled with negative interpretations. "I must have said something wrong. They're upset with me. I shouldn't have asked." The longer the silence lasts, the more the waiting person adjusts their behavior. They become more apologetic. They soften their requests. They add explanations they didn't think they needed. By the time the other person finally responds, the power dynamic has shifted. The person who waited is now grateful just to get a reply. They don't push back. They don't ask why it took so long. They've already been trained to accept the delay as normal. This happens in workplaces constantly. An employee sends a question. The boss doesn't answer. The employee sends a follow-up, more carefully worded. Still no answer. The employee starts wondering if they're bothering their boss too much. Eventually, they stop asking. The boss never had to say, "Stop asking me questions." The silence did the work. How anxiety gets mistaken for personality. People on the outside of these relationships often misread what's happening. They see someone who apologizes a lot, who seems uncertain, who takes a long time to make decisions. They assume that's just who that person is. Anxious, insecure, lacking confidence. But if you watch that same person in a different setting, with different people, they might act completely differently. They might be clear, decisive, direct. The anxiety isn't a stable trait. It's a response to a specific relationship structure. A woman seems nervous and overly careful around her partner. She checks in constantly. She apologizes for small things. She second-guesses her own preferences. Her friends assume she's just like that. Maybe she has low self-esteem. Maybe she's naturally anxious. But at work, she's confident. She makes decisions quickly. She doesn't apologize unless she actually did something wrong. She trusts her own judgment. The difference isn't her. It's the feedback she gets. At work, when she makes a decision, she finds out quickly if it was right or wrong. She gets clear information. She can adjust. At home, feedback is unpredictable. Her partner sometimes seems happy with her choices and sometimes quietly displeased. She can't tell what the pattern is, so she stays in a state of constant monitoring. Her friends see the anxiety, but not the structure that produces it. They think she needs to work on her confidence. They don't see that her confidence is fine. The relationship is what's broken. How anxiety makes people useful. Anxiety doesn't just make people easier to control. It makes them more productive in specific ways. An anxious employee works longer hours. Not because they love the job, because they're never sure they've done enough. An anxious child keeps their room clean and finishes homework without being asked. Not because they're naturally responsible, because they've learned that their parents' mood is hard to predict, and perfect behavior is the safest bet. An anxious partner does more household work, remembers more details, tracks more obligations. Not because they want to, because they're trying to prevent conflict they can't name. The person benefiting from this doesn't have to ask for more effort. The anxiety generates it automatically. A manager never tells his team to work weekends, but he sends emails late at night. He mentions how much he's working. He sighs about how busy things are. He doesn't respond to questions during business hours, but answers immediately at 9 p.m. The team starts working nights and weekends. Not because it's required, because they're anxious about seeming less committed than he is. They don't want to be the person who only works normal hours when everyone else is pushing harder. The manager gets more work from them without ever directly asking. And if someone complains about work-life balance, he can honestly say he never required it. This is how anxiety makes itself useful to the person creating it. It turns uncertainty into effort. It turns fear of judgment into extra productivity. It turns the desire for approval into unpaid labor. How predictability reduces anxiety. The opposite of anxiety in a social relationship is not happiness. It's predictability. When someone knows what to expect, when feedback is clear and consistent, when responses follow a pattern, anxiety drops. A new manager takes over a team. The previous manager was unpredictable. Sometimes he praised people. Sometimes he ignored them. Sometimes he got angry over small mistakes. No one knew what would set him off. The new manager sets up a system. Every Friday, she meets with each person for 15 minutes. She tells them what went well that week and what needs work. The feedback is specific. The tone is calm. It happens every week at the same time. At first, people are still nervous. They've learned to expect inconsistency. But after a few weeks, the anxiety starts to fade. They know when they'll get feedback. They know what form it will take. They can plan around it. They stop spending energy trying to read her mood. They stop guessing whether their work is good enough. They can focus on the actual work instead of managing their own worry. This doesn't mean the new manager is nicer. She gives critical feedback just like the old manager did. But the criticism is predictable. People know it's coming. They know it's not personal. They know what to do with it. Predictability creates safety. Not because everything is positive, because people can orient themselves. They can make decisions based on information instead of fear. How anxiety blocks feedback. When someone is anxious, they stop giving honest feedback. An employee notices her manager made a mistake in a report. It's a small error, but it could cause problems later. She thinks about mentioning it. Then she hesitates. Will he be defensive? Will he think she's criticizing him? Will it seem like she's trying to make him look bad? She doesn't say anything. The mistake stays in the report. It causes a problem later. The manager blames the team for not catching it earlier. The employee feels frustrated but says nothing. Anxiety doesn't just change how people ask for things. It changes what they're willing to say at all. In a family, a teenager notices his parent is drinking more than usual. He's worried, but he's also afraid of how she'll react if he brings it up. Will she get angry? Will she shut down? Will she say he's overreacting? He stays quiet. The drinking continues. The worry continues. The relationship becomes built around things no one is allowed to mention. This is how anxiety protects dysfunction. It makes people afraid to name problems. It makes feedback feel dangerous. It turns honest communication into a risk no one wants to take. The person in power doesn't have to silence anyone directly. The anxiety does it for them. How institutions use anxiety. Anxiety doesn't just operate between individuals. It operates through systems. A university has a policy that students can appeal grades. The process is described in the student handbook. It seems straightforward. But students who try to appeal find the process confusing. The forms are complicated. The deadlines are unclear. They have to meet with multiple people who all give slightly different information. The whole thing takes weeks. Most students give up. They decide it's not worth the stress. They accept the grade and move on. The university doesn't have to reject many appeals. The anxiety built into the process filters out most challenges before they start. This happens in healthcare. Insurance companies create systems where getting approval for treatment requires multiple phone calls, transferred between departments, each person asking for different information. Many people give up before they get the care they need. The system doesn't deny coverage. It makes seeking coverage exhausting. It happens in legal systems. Filing a complaint requires forms, fees, deadlines, procedures that change depending on the situation. People without lawyers often can't navigate it. The system doesn't explicitly block them. It makes participation so stressful that most people stop trying. Anxiety becomes a filter. It separates people who have time, resources, and emotional energy from people who don't. It makes the system accessible to those who can tolerate uncertainty and inaccessible to those who can't. And because the system never explicitly says no, it looks fair. Anyone can file an appeal. Anyone can request coverage. Anyone can make a complaint. The fact that most people don't is treated as their choice, not as a designed outcome. How anxiety becomes self-sustaining. Once anxiety is established in a relationship or system, it doesn't need constant reinforcement. It maintains itself. A worker has been at a company for 2 years. In the first few months, her manager was critical and unpredictable. She learned to be very careful. She learned to over-prepare. She learned to avoid asking for things. Now she has a new manager. He's clearer. He's more supportive. He responds quickly. He gives direct feedback. But she still acts the same way. She still apologizes too much. She still over-explains. She still hesitates to make requests. The new manager wonders why she's so anxious. He hasn't done anything to create that. But he's inheriting a pattern that was already built. The anxiety doesn't come from him. It comes from the memory of how things used to be. And until she gets enough consistent evidence that things are different, the anxiety will stay. This is why abusive relationships leave marks that last long after the relationship ends. The anxiety becomes trained into the person. It becomes a reflex. Even in safe situations, they still flinch. This is why people who grow up in unpredictable homes carry tension into adulthood. They've learned that safety is temporary. That calm is just the space before the next disruption. That letting their guard down is dangerous. The original source of anxiety might be gone, but the response remains. How anxiety and control overlap. Not all anxiety is a tool of control. Sometimes environments are genuinely uncertain. Sometimes people are anxious because the future is unclear, not because someone is manipulating them. But anxiety becomes a method of control when one person has the power to reduce uncertainty and chooses not to. A boss could give clear feedback, but gives vague responses instead. A parent could explain their expectations but keeps their child guessing. A partner could communicate their needs but stays silent and then acts hurt. In these cases, the anxiety isn't incidental. It's functional. It serves the person in power. It keeps the other person focused on them. It keeps them trying to please. It keeps them afraid to push back. It keeps them in a state of constant effort. The person creating the anxiety might not see it this way. They might think they're just being efficient. They might think they're teaching the other person to be more independent. They might think they're protecting themselves from conflict. But the outcome is the same. One person stays anxious. The other person benefits from that anxiety. And the relationship becomes organized around managing feelings instead of solving problems. How people break the pattern. Anxiety loses its power when someone stops treating it as information. A person realizes their boss's silence doesn't mean they did something wrong. It means their boss is disorganized. They stop interpreting delay as judgment. They follow up without apologizing. They ask for what they need without preemptive justification. At first, this feels dangerous. The anxiety spikes. But over time, they notice nothing bad happens. Their boss responds the same way whether they apologize or not. The careful wording didn't actually matter. The anxiety was doing work that didn't need to be done. A woman realizes her partner's mood swings aren't her responsibility to manage. She stops trying to prevent his bad days. She stops tailoring her behavior to his tone. She just acts normally. He gets upset. He accuses her of not caring. But she holds steady. She doesn't argue. She doesn't apologize. She just continues being consistent. Eventually, one of two things happens. Either he adjusts and the relationship becomes more stable, or the relationship ends because it was only functional when she was anxious. Either outcome is better than spending years in a state of constant worry. Breaking the pattern doesn't mean eliminating anxiety. It means refusing to let anxiety dictate behavior. It means noticing when worry is a response to real danger and when it's a response to a manufactured lack of clarity. It means asking, who benefits from my uncertainty? What would happen if I acted as though I didn't need their approval? Sometimes the answer is that real consequences follow. In those cases, the anxiety is warranted. The situation is actually unsafe. But often the answer is that nothing changes. The other person adjusts, the system accommodates. And the anxiety was only ever a test of whether you would tolerate it. Closing reflection. You're in a meeting. Someone asks a question. Your manager pauses before answering. The pause is long enough that the room gets quiet. You feel it. Everyone feels it. That small spike of worry. Did the person ask the wrong thing? Is the manager annoyed? The manager finally answers. The answer is fine, normal. But the pause already did its work. Next meeting, people ask fewer questions. They think harder before speaking. They wait to see if someone else will ask first. No one decided this. No rule was made. But the group learned something from that pause. They learned that questions carry risk. Not always, but sometimes. And since they can't tell which times are safe, the safest strategy is to stay quiet. This is how anxiety moves through rooms, through families, through organizations, through relationships. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It just changes the space between people. It makes some people smaller and some people larger. It turns communication into a test that no one is sure how to pass. You've felt this. You've done this. You've been on both sides of it. And now, maybe, you'll notice it. The pause that's too long, the response that's too vague, the feeling that you need permission for something you're already allowed to do. That feeling has a function. It's doing something, and it's worth asking, who does it serve?